Joined now by Wayne Duvenhage. He is the CEO of the Organisation Undoing Abuse, OUTA, South African Corruption Fighting Civil Action Organisation. He joins us now to talk about this. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Duvenhage. Sir, as we mentioned, the Auditor-General, Zakani Maluleka, announcing that her office will undertake real-time audits of the funds set aside to provide relief for KwaZulu-Natal. I mean, if anything is to go by the meeting that we saw by the two houses on what is happening, and a lot of it reflecting on endemic corruption and how it's robbed a lot of needy people from much needed funds. No doubt this is a welcome move.
Yes, absolutely. From a trustworthy point of view, I think there's a lot of trust in one or two departments in government, and the Auditor-General of South Africa is certainly one of those institutions that have gained the trust of the public because they say it as it is. We've seen their reports on local government, on national government, where the maladministration and waste lies, and they're not intimidated. So they do good work, they write good reports, they're accurate, and we are very pleased that at least they will be watching over these funds and making sure that the money is spent as well as it should be.
I mean, some have argued that centralization is the best way to hold accountability. We'll get to the role of Treasury in just a moment, but it's clear that the available funds will come from budgets from departments, various departments, provinces, municipalities and public entities, which is where some of the fruitless and wasteful expenditure and indeed actually nefarious actions, many have said, has been centered. Share your thoughts about this, please.
Yeah, look, we are extremely concerned, certainly in local government. In local government, municipalities have been decimated and the metros aren't spared of that. There has been a lack of the required professional oversight and accountability and transparency in government departments, which has given rise to so much wasteful expenditure, corruption that has happened under the noses of people in positions of power. In fact, people in positions of power abusing their power, and part of the corruption so often, which is no wonder why the president in Parliament speaks about the sad reality that society expects corruption to happen when relief expenditure of this nature has to come to the fore. And that's a sad situation that we find our country in, because there is this lack of trust. There's been far too much looting and mismanagement. But the biggest problem is there's been far too little accountability. And without accountability, without the transparency that helps expose and stop this corruption, people are really getting tired and becoming numb to the fact and almost accepting and expecting corruption to take place. And that is so sad for our country to be in that situation.
I mean, if it happens at the basic income grant level, I mean, one would say, it just speaks to a system that has long been rotting. But Treasury is saying that the relevant institutions and how they will reprioritize their budgets, including how they access disaster response grants and requirements for reallocation of conditional grant funds will be monitored. The PFMA is generally very clear about procurement, allocation of funds, and cases in which exceptions are made, deviations. But we know that these are the very rules that are used to steal money from the fiscus. Share with us some. I know you've done quite a bit of legwork on some of the institutional problems. So how can Treasury ensure that oversight is effective?
Well, it's more difficult, as you're saying, in times like this because procurement takes place at a much faster pace. You've got to get the money to where it has to be spent to build the roads, to fix infrastructure quite quickly. We saw that with the PPE procurement in the COVID-19 situation with food and so forth. Things have to happen quite quickly, and that's where the guard is dropped, because there's less oversight, and suddenly you find companies that are set up that are participating in purchase agreements that look very good, and before you know it, the money has changed hands, and either the goods, the quality thereof, is not up to scratch, or the money is paid and the goods aren't delivered. And that's what we've got to watch very closely. And we see it even outside of emergency procurement like this right now in many municipalities across the country. People are being allocated contracts to build roads, build water infrastructure, and very often we don't get the infrastructure, or when we get it 2 years later, it's damaged. It's because it was so poorly put together, and that's when you start scratching and looking deeper. You find individuals and companies with no experience, beauty salons and people that have just got no idea of what they are supposed to be doing in some of these areas. Were given these massive contracts. So it is, it's so sad that we are paying for 3 kilometers of road and we get 1 kilometer of road, so to speak. And we've seen this research, we've done it, how we are robbed as a result of lack of oversight. So Treasury has a big role to play in oversight, but I'm afraid they're stretched, and we need to be sure that when we are procuring, that we're getting the bang for buck. Our money needs to go further, because all of these departments that have to start reallocating funds, they need this money to build schools, to build clinics, to build homes. We've got so much of a backlog in just normal every day-to-day requirements.
Treasury says, as you mentioned, that the loopholes would be in the rebuilding and repairing of infrastructure. So it says this will happen within the Appropriation Act when that is enacted. I'd imagine that's some sort of a fail-safe. Are you aware of what it stipulates and how it will make it harder for people to be involved in wanton thieving, really?
Well, we're not aware. We would like to see how this takes place. But again, when it comes to procurement, we don't see the necessary transparency. We don't see the necessary oversight. So we want to ask the question that even if you're going to allocate these funds through an appropriation bill, that's all very fine. That's the paperwork that says we're going to move money from here to there. But what we need to see is how that money is spent, how it is allocated, and after the fact, is there an audit that is undertaken to say, yes, the goods were delivered at the quality and levels that were indicated?
So just a quick one, because we have run out of time. Real-time audits, how do they help detect irregularities in the intended purpose of the disbursements of the funds and how they're used?
Well, they if they're effective, they do help in that they are real time. Before the money is paid, the auditors will make sure that the goods and services have been delivered, and again at the quality. That's real-time auditing, and that's good. We wish that happened all the time, and that's why we have the oversight requirements of all the entities every day, right down to local government, which doesn't seem to happen. So that real-time auditing can be effective, but if it's done properly.
Well, thanks so much for that. Much appreciated your time and your insights, Wayne Duvenhage. He is the CEO of the organization Undoing Tax Abuse, that's a corruption fighting civil society organization in South Africa.